In this segment, we're going to be discussing I hate wedge treating. So that's going to be the title of the video. Big Madge hates wedge treating. So we're going to discuss why. So wedge treating, talking about the two-tier healthcare system. I'm not prepared to see working class patients priced out and left out. And yeah, you know, this kind of notion of where we can just use the private sector should have been debunked so long ago, but here we are again, apparently.
Well, it seems mad to me that we've got spare capacity in the private sector where we're not using it. And
drives me nuts. Bro is shouting, and the audio quality on this is the audio volume on this is so low.
We've got a situation today where middle and upper class people who can pay to go private are being seen faster, getting diagnosed more quickly and treated more quickly, which is certainly better for their quality of life, but better for their outcome.
Okay, let's leave that. And he's clear what his argument is. You know, like, we can use the private sector to deal with the backlog. That's what he's been saying. If you listen to what a person, you know, who's a trade unionist, a nurse, has said, there isn't spare capacity, there isn't a spare pool of qualified staff, increased demand on the private sector, they will offer healthier salaries for people to leave the NHS and drive our service further into the ground. This is privatisation, folks, and Wes knows it, which is true. If we offer these contracts to the private sector, they're going to have to get more staff. So either the UK is more lax on healthcare visas to allow more kind of staff from abroad to come in, or they're going to poach more staff from the NHS, which won't be able to increase salaries, because I doubt the government will allow it, even a Labour government. So this is an actual person who works in the field saying this. We got Wes Streeting just picking fights with people.
I should say in the Sun yesterday, where you
writing in the Sun as a Labour MP. Okay. He was on their channel as well. Just embarrassing.
About saying we will use spare capacity in the private sector to cut the waiting lists. Middle class lefties cry betrayal. Why use language like that?
You can have a cursory glance at my social media mentions to understand why. Look, I think there is a terrible two-tier system we have in our country at the moment, where those who can afford it are paying to go private and those who can't are being left behind. And I think there is, both a pragmatic and principled case for using spare private sector capacity.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Again, like, it's not really spare, is it? Based on this, you know, there isn't a spare pool of qualified staff. You can argue you can use their machines or whatever, but isn't it? Aren't we better off just buying the machines ourselves or building them here or something, rather than renting them from the private sector? Like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can argue like how long it takes to get them started up, but, you know, this long term for the NHS is better to have whatever machines you require rather than leasing them from the private sector. Or you can do both. You can rent them from the private sector and order your own in, or however it works, build them, whatever kind of things we need to get done to get them. But like, owning our own devices make more sense. I don't know. But again, like, it's not just that, it's the staffing crisis. That's one of the major problems. And again, there isn't a spare pool of qualified staff, which is the key here. Even if you have a shortage of machines, that's one thing. If you have a shortage of staff, that's a completely different kettle of fish, and that's something that West Streeting doesn't address, and that's something that the media need to do better on and address that point.
That's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate argument, but why use language like that? I mean, there'll be plenty of MPs in your own party who do not approve of the idea of using private capacity into bringing that into the NHS. Are they middle-class lefties?
Well, I'm not sure who you're talking about in the.
Oh, come on, Wes. I mean, it has been, as you well know, throughout Labour history.
There is this double standard. I think you've got to ask this question, actually.
No, I'm asking the question I'm asking. There have been plenty. There have been plenty of MPs.
What I'd say to them, and what I'd say to people pouring into my mentions, actually the usual names and faces, is: so you're saying that because of your left-wing principles, people should wait longer. Is that it? So people should wait.
I'm saying the money shouldn't be going to the private sector. Like, you know, the idea of spare capacity just isn't true. What you're doing is just giving money to potentially party donors, or maybe people who've donated to you personally. Like, that's what I'd want to see. Like, I want to see exactly how this is going to work, because the staffing doesn't exist. There isn't a spare supply of staffing. As you said, if you're going to argue about facilities, that's a different thing. But again, like, you know, the private sector are going to need staff for these facilities. And so what do you think is going to happen? They're going to poach the staff from the NHS. That's one of the key arguments that's being made here by someone who actually works in the field.
Wait for months in pain.
You know, I'd love to see how the BMA and all these other associations actually think of these plans. I think that's what these people should be doing on their shows, is interviewing people like that, people that work for the BMA, work for these, you know, the nurses' unions and things like that, and ask them, you know, how does this actually work? That's what I'd want to see.
An agony, because your left-wing principles are more important than getting people faster access to care.
That's a perfectly legitimate argument. But
even though we know that people are paying to go faster because they can afford to, or they've scrimped and saved or even borrowed to go faster. That's not fair. That's not left wing. And, you know, what I'm fed up of is this absurd charge that somehow by using spare private sector capacity, Labour wants to privatise the NHS. I've been so clear about this. We'll privatise the NHS over my dead body. I believe in the NHS as a public service free at the point of use, because I don't think people should...
Again, this is something the Tories have said as well. They try and argue, oh, it's going to be free at the point of use, but it's like that money should be going to the private sector. That's the point, because you're costing people, costing the taxpayer money, but B, you're poaching money from the NHS. You're poaching staff from the NHS. That's one of the major problems.
Ever have to worry about the bill when it comes to their health.
That's all perfectly fine and a perfectly legitimate argument. But I would put to you that maybe the people in your Twitter mentions are not especially relevant to anything, and using language like that, aping the kind of quite just culture war, politically aggressive language that the Conservatives have used, sound a bit like Suella Braverman.
Yeah, I mean, the argument of the Tories, the Labour Party will end the culture war, complete garbage.
Is that what we can expect from a Keir Starmer-led Labour government?
No, I think that's an absurd comparison, to be honest. But look, the point is...
I think you'd agree with it completely.
The point is that we're having a conversation about Labour's approach to reforming and modernising the NHS and cutting waiting lists, because we've made punchy arguments that cut through. And sure, I could do some vanilla policy pamphlets. I've done some of those in my time. I could make far more cosy and comfortable arguments that make people feel warm inside. And then we'll still be scratching our heads with people saying, oh, but, you know, what are your policies? We don't hear them.
I mean, to be fair, that's true. We don't know a lot about your policies, to be fair. But, you know, one of the policies you have put out there is garbage, you know, using private sector capacity when, again, there isn't the spare pool of qualified staff. That's one of the key problems we're running into here. And, you know, that's something Goodall should have done a much better job of asking. Rather than focusing on the cultural aspect, it should be focusing on the logistics argument.
So I make no apology whatsoever for making sure that Labour's policies and arguments are heard right across the breadth of the media, not just in the pages of newspapers that have been traditionally friendly to Labour. So I've got no problem at all with making those sorts of arguments to Sun readers, to Mail readers, to Express readers and newspapers that haven't recently supported the Labour Party.
Recently, the last time the Sun supported, I think the Labour Party was in the early 2000s. I don't know if the Daily Mail ever supported the Labour Party.
And also doing so in a way that that makes sure we've got debate.
I'm not going to mention the specific paper's name, but one of those papers he mentioned, I'm 90% sure, infiltrated Ed Miliband's father's funeral and said some horrendous things about him.
That makes sure we've got cut through.
Yeah, I just really can't stand the geese, honestly. And this from Francis Ryan, who writes, he's a Guardian columnist, you know, saying, as a working class lefty, I can tell whereas that lining the pockets of private health firms isn't just ideologically flawed, it's inefficient too. Many private staff are NHS moonlighters, some even share facilities. Fund the NHS, not big business. And so it should be up to the NHS if they want to, if they're in a position where they have to use the private sector to private sector capacity, you know, their infrastructure to get things done, rather than giving the contracts to the private sector. Like, they can rent out the facility and have NHS staff there, rather than renting, you know, giving that money to the private sector where they're going to poach NHS staff. It doesn't. This brother don't make sense, honestly. I just can't stand the geezer. Like, fair enough, if you're just pushing the privatised angle, that's bad. You know, that's as a policy, that's bad. But as a human being. You know, pushing this middle-class lefties thing is complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense, because I don't want this to happen. I'm not a middle-class lefty. No, I'm not middle-class at all. Like, bro, your policy is bad. Just accept it. You know, like, I really don't like him. I think if he gets in, he's going to be a complete goon, and that's one of my big fears. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.